Hannah, and in today's video I'm going to be going through my 2020 reading stats and then at the end talking about my 2021 reading goals based on those numbers. So buckle up. If you like numbers, this one is for you, and let's get started. So in total I read 111 books, which balances out to 44,239 pages. That is the most books I've ever read in a year ever. I'm really happy with that number of books and pages. That is the most I've ever read in any year, despite everything that was going on. I'm really pleased with that, and I'm also really happy with the quality of books. It wasn't just about quantity. I was reading a lot of 5-star books this year, which you'll see in a little bit. The average book length equals about 398 pages, so almost 400 pages per book. That is insane. That means I read a lot of books that were pretty thick, and that has never happened to me before. I've also this year I've really gotten into short fictions. So while I was reading all these short stories and novellas, I was also reading incredibly long books as well to even it out, to get that average page count per book. Something to keep in mind about my reading is I reread a lot. I use audiobooks to help me fall asleep, and those books that I use to help with that are books that I have read multiple times. And sometimes I mark those as read on Goodreads if I fall asleep and I rewind and re-listen to the parts that I was asleep for. I count those as reads because I am listening to a good hour and a half before I actually fall asleep every single night. So in my stats, I have read quite a few rereads. So that kind of has skewed that graph a little bit because it's gonna look like I gave out a ton of 5 stars, but keep in mind those 34 rereads were all 5 stars. So if you take that away, it kind of looks a little bit more manageable. My favorite graph to look at is my genre pie chart that I created. So I'm gonna flash that up right now, and I'm gonna kind of walk you through how I labeled genres. So I tried to pick the main genre for each book. Some books could be categorized in multiple ways, but I just tried to pick ones that made the most sense. And I was also very interested in seeing the difference in my reading between YA and adult and middle grade. I read a few middle grade, but mostly YA and adult, and I kind of wanted to see the breakdown of that. So that's why I have separate YA categories. Because I exclusively used to read YA back in the day, and I only recently got into adult books like 2 years ago. So really I was kind of curious to see how my reading had changed, numerically. The genres that I discovered that I really like this year are in the thriller, mystery, horror category, and also romance. I didn't read a ton from these categories, but because I just read from them for kind of the first time, or I discovered, hey, if I read more books like these, I might really like it. So the category that I read the most of is fantasy. I am a huge fantasy nerd. Both young adult and adult fantasy is my favorite, but I'm getting into reading goals for next year a little bit, but I really started to love these other genres as well. And so next year I really hope to pick up more hard sci-fi. I have a couple of dystopians in here that I have separated out from the sci-fi category, but so I mean, if you lump those all together, it's all kind of in that same sci-fi family. But I really enjoyed almost every single sci-fi book I read this year. So for next year, that's definitely going to be a goal. Yes, I still love fantasy, but I kind of want to diversify it even more for next year. So I'm not going to go through the numbers of each individual slot because that would be forever, but 18.9% was fantasy and about 9 or 10% sci-fi to give a comparison. So I'd like to have those two categories a little bit more equal for next year. And also nonfiction. Nonfiction I have 15%, marked, which is 17 books, and I definitely would like to read that, if not more, nonfiction next year. So that is the genre pie chart. The next graph I want to get to is a histogram of my page count. Now I talked about this a little bit in the beginning of the video where I said, you know, the average length of my books this year was 398 pages, so, you know, 400 pages. And so you can see on this graph that the books that I read the most out of, the length of those books, was between the 350 to 550 page count. Obviously, the over 1200 was Rhythm of War, and then less than 50, I read a few comic books this year, actual comic books, which only have like 10 pages in them or something like that. So, you know, you can kind of see that for the most part, a lot of my books that I read are between 350 and 500 pages, which I think is fantastic. Like, I thought I was reading like these really short books this whole year, but in truth, a lot of what I was reading is in that, you know, fairly large category. And so I'm really pleased with that. I don't really care about page count necessarily. I didn't have a specific goal in mind with page count. It's just kind of interesting to see the breakdown. The next graph I'm going to show you is the histogram of my ratings. So every book that I rated 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 star. And I also have it broken out by 0.25, 0.5, and 0.75 between all of those, because I felt like, you know, there were some books in the 4 category that were just a little bit better than others, and so on and so forth. I feel a little limited in the 5-star scale if you don't do half stars and quarter stars, if that makes sense. So in my personal categorizing and adding data to my spreadsheet, I did you know, half stars and whatnot. So on Goodreads, my average star rating is 4.2. But that is skewed pretty high because I normally would round up for my star rating on Goodreads. Even if I gave something a 4.5 stars, I normally would just round it up to a 5 on Goodreads. So that number is a little bit higher than the true data suggests. So I gave, again, a lot of 5 stars this year. 31 5 stars this year, and that's a lot. I feel like that's a lot, and you know, many of them were rereads, but a lot of them were new favorites for me. Also, I would consider 4.5 books that I rated 4.5 also in that category of favorite books. And I only gave one book 1 star this year. So overall, I read some incredible books, and I like to see that. I like to think that I know my taste, but I'm still discovering new things and really enjoying my time with that discovery. So yeah, that's this graph, and it doesn't really help me find with a reading goal per se, but I just think it's kind of interesting to see my breakdown of ratings. The next chart I have is a pie chart of the format in which I consumed the book. So because of my wrist pain that I deal with, it is hard for me to like hold a book open. So the majority of books that I consume, I read via audiobook. And so that is 70% of my reads this year were audiobooks, and that breaks down to 78 books. Although I did read some physical and ebooks, the vast majority are audio for me. And I love audiobooks. I think they're fantastic. You can change the reading speed depending on the narrator and how much attention you're willing to pay a particular book. If you're really into it, maybe you want to slow down a little bit, you know what I mean? And again, this graph doesn't really pertain to any particular goal. I was just kind of curious to see the true numbers of how many books do I listen to versus physically read the physical book or the ebook. So just kind of interesting. The next stat I have is another pie chart where I got my books from. So I had a goal set at the beginning of last year to read more books from the library and stop buying so many books. because I was finding I was buying a lot of books and then I would read them and not like them. So I kind of was like, okay, these books I keep hearing everyone talk about, I'm gonna read them from the library first, and if they're a new favorite, then I will buy a copy of it. And so that was kind of a goal I had set in 2020, and the numbers show that 30% of the books that I read were from the library, and I feel like that's pretty good. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that number. Moving on, pre-owned is books that I owned prior to 2020. So those books that I already had in my collection that I just hadn't read yet. And so that breaks down to 37 books, which I feel pretty proud of that too. Like, I already owned those books and I was able to knock those out. And now I only have a few books on my shelves that I haven't read, which feels like a big accomplishment. So I'm pretty proud of that. And then another 33% are books I purchased in 2020 and read. So another 37 books. And again, I'm actually not that upset by that. I feel like 30% for, roughly 30% for each of those categories, I feel is pretty balanced. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. I ended up unhauling a few of those purchased books, but I mean, some of them I kept, so I'm pretty happy with that. And then the last, couple percentages were books that I borrowed from my mom. Books that I borrowed from my mom or I was given a gift. So that's only like 3 books total. But that's where the rest of the numbers come in. Another chart that I'm just kind of interested in is the publication dates of the books that I'm reading. So a lot of what I'm reading is from 2010 to 2020. Which you can see in this chart, but I have read, a smattering of classics and some older fiction this year, and I don't have a particular goal with this. I just kind of wanted to see where I was at with publication dates. I just think it's kind of interesting to see. So those are all of the graphs that I wanted to talk about, and the main goals, 2021 goals that I have are based on the genre graph. All right, I have my journal here, which I actually have written out specific goals. In the beginning of 2020, I had goals kind of in the back of my head as I was choosing books. And based on the numbers, I did pretty well, but there are things that I could improve upon for my reading and, for diversifying my reading and having goals physically written down and the data so that I can compare it to is really going to help me, I think, in 2021. So here are the specific goals that I have. So for my first goal, I wanted to read 25 or more hard sci-fi books. I really am getting into sci-fi, and I only read about 11 or 12 hard sci-fi. I probably read more than that, including dystopian, but I'm talking hard sci-fi. I would like to read at least 25 hard sci-fi. The next goal I have is to read 20 nonfiction books. So last year I read 17 nonfiction, which is amazing. Like, I'm still really proud that I read 17, but I think I could, push myself a little bit and read 20. Now, the next 2 goals are bare minimum. These are bare minimum goals, and I hope to completely blow them out of the water, but I want to start low. And that is to read 5 disability own voices books and 5 trans, non-binary, or gender non-conforming own voices works. And that's 5 for each of those. And in 2020, I read about 5 of each of those. But in 2021, I want to be intentional about choosing books by authors who are disabled and in that trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming category. So this is just a marker to say, hey, make sure you are actually, going out of your way to research and find books that fit into these 2 categories. Because like I said, I did read some, but I want to read more. So 5 is kind of the bare minimum. The next goal I have is to finish all of my owned outstanding series. So I have a few series that I own in their entirety, but I haven't read all of the books in the series. So I've read, the first one or the first few, and I just have 1 book left in the series or something. So every book series that I own the complete series of, I would like to finish in 2021. And those series are the Diabolic by S.J. Kincaid, The Fallen Kingdoms by Morgan Rhodes, The Diviners. I only have one book left in The Diviners. Come on, I just have The King of Prose left. And the last one I have is Rebel of the Sands by Alwyn. So just those 4 series I'd like to finish. Hopefully I don't need to reread all of the previous books to finish them out, but we'll see. The goal is to just at least finish them, and if I don't finish them, consider donating them, because they're just taking up room, and if I'm never gonna finish them, if they don't bring me joy anymore, I might as well pass them along to my younger cousin, or, you know, Goodwill, or whomever, my local library even. My next goal is a YouTube goal, and that is to publish 1 video per month. Just 1 per month. That is all I'm putting on myself. I would love to get a video up once a week, but with my health, it's really unpredictable. So I'm just gonna set the bar low, and if I blow it out of the water, I can celebrate even more, you know? So hopefully you'll be seeing at least 1 video a month from me in 2021. The next goal is another, like, this is just a bare minimum, and that is to read 50 books by BIPOC authors. And in 2020, I read 41 books by BIPOC authors out of 111. And that is close to 50%, but not really, not close. I can do better. So I'm going to intentionally try to read at least 50%. 50% of my reads of 2021 should be written by BIPOC authors at the minimum. I would love to get it even higher, like 75%, but at a minimum, 50 books by BIPOC authors for sure. And then kind of a similar story for queer books, books by queer authors with, you know, queer main characters, etc. I have 40 on this list. Now, I read about 25 books by queer authors featuring queer main characters, but again, out of 111, I could do better. So it's, you know, those 2 goals are very similar, and, you know, of themselves. And honestly, the reason I only put 40 for queer books is because I ran out of space in my journal. So in my head, it's 50, you know, 50 for queer books, 50 for BIPOC, but on my journal it just says 40. Shh, don't judge me. I didn't want to redo the entire page just to add more boxes. So we all know I'm making this video, so at the end of 2021, I can check myself. And then the last thing I have is just miscellaneous goals that I'm not really gonna track, but I kind of have in the back of my mind. So the first one is read 100 books, and that is a Goodreads goal. So I just put 100 books on my Goodreads list, and I can just tally those up as the year goes on, and that's how I'm gonna track it, not in my journal. Another goal is to use the library. Again, I'm already using the library quite a bit, but keep that momentum going. I would still really like to use my library about 30 to 40% of the books that I read. The next goal is to keep my reading journal updated. I would like to start taking notes on the books that I read, like physically writing notes in my notebook. So when I talk about those books on YouTube, I can refer back to my notes to refresh my memory. And so that's what I mean when I say reading journal, but I don't have a specific goal related to that. I just kind of want to play that one by ear and see what works for me for writing in a reading journal. The next goal is to start writing book reviews and posting them to Goodreads, Amazon, you know, all the places you're supposed to leave book reviews. I don't really write book reviews, again, because it's a lot of typing. So I want to start getting better at the voice recognition software that I have, and that might be a good way to write book reviews. Next and last is to finish my novel. Yes, I have written 98% of a novel. It is a middle grade story, so it's only about 60,000 words. And about 50% of it is written in a Word document, and the other 50% is written in my notebook. you know, physically written. So I would like to, by the end of the year, have at least the first draft all written in one Word document so I can see the final word count. I don't know if this book is going to go anywhere, but I would feel such a huge sense of accomplishment if I finally finished at least the first draft of that by the end of the year. So I don't know if I'm going to be doing a lot of writing content on this channel, but just know I do write for fun in my free time when my wrists allow. So that is another goal. So that is it. Those are all of my goals for 2021 as compared to my 2020 reading stats, and I just want to say thank you so much for watching. And at the end of 2021, I would love to see you guys come back and check in to see how I did with these goals. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!